U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken arrived in Shanghai on April 24th. On the same day, he started a new round of visits to China, and the U.S. Congress passed a $95 billion foreign aid bill, including aid to Taiwan and a possible ban on TikTok. In addition, Apple Incorporated and Tesla have reported unfavorable news in China. When we put the pieces together, we will see a trend that the CCP is incapable of stopping. Blinken met with Chinese business leaders in Shanghai and then headed to Beijing on April 26 for talks with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi and a possible meeting with Xi Jinping, the head of the Chinese Communist Party or CCP. However, expectations for this visit aren't high in general. Blinken's visit is the latest round of high-level engagement between the U.S. and China, which along with joint working groups on issues ranging from global trade to military communications, have eased a stalemate in U.S.-China relations that began early last year over a spy balloon from China.
We have an obligation for our people, and indeed an obligation for the world to manage the relationship between our two countries responsibly. That is the obligation that we have, and one that we take very seriously. And I think the direction from President Biden and President Xi was to continue to build those lines of communication, to sustain them, and again, to deal directly with our differences as we also seek to build cooperation. So thank you for having us here today. I look forward to a good conversation.
The U.S.-China relationship has a long way to go to make a real difference. Taiwan is still a flashpoint, and tensions are rising over Beijing's support for Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Blinken will press Beijing to stop Chinese companies from supporting the Russian defense industry. In fact, Beijing was quite nervous for a while before Blinken's visit and was only relieved when Washington had so far not imposed sanctions on major Chinese banks. Analysts have long considered sanctions against the banks a nuclear option because of their potential impact on the global economy and U.S.-China relations. A senior U.S. Department of State official said in a briefing to reporters on April 19th that Washington was prepared to take measures against Chinese companies that it believed were undermining U.S. and European security, but didn't provide details. On April 23rd, sources familiar with the matter told the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. was drafting sanctions that would provide Blinken with diplomatic leverage to negotiate with China. The sanctions could cut off some Chinese banks from the global financial system, SWIFT. The Wall Street Journal said that this time, on the occasion of Blinken's visit to China, U.S. officials hope to persuade Beijing to make changes with the warning of cutting off Chinese banks' access to U.S. dollars, as well as the risk that trade relations with Europe could be affected. The banks are key middlemen in China's commercial exports to Russia, processing payments and providing credit for trade deals with client companies. U.S. officials have said sanctions targeting Chinese banks are an escalating option if diplomacy fails to convince Beijing to rein in exports to Russia. In recent weeks, U.S. officials have pressured Beijing in private meetings and phone calls and warned that the U.S. is ready to take action against Chinese financial institutions that handle trade in such military and civilian dual-use goods. According to the Wall Street Journal, cutting off banks' access to the U.S. dollar, the main currency of global trade, has a broader impact than ordinary sanctions targeting individuals and businesses and is therefore often used as a last resort. Such sanctions, which often force banks to fail and affect their entire customer base, are particularly risky at a time when China is facing growing credit problems. But since then, U.S. officials have told Reuters they have no plans to do so. At the April 23rd press conference of the Chinese Foreign Ministry, a reporter asked a question about the issue described above. The spokesman responded, "China's right to carry out normal economic and trade exchanges with all countries, including Russia, is inviolable, and we will resolutely defend our legitimate rights and interests." In fact, China's major banks are very scared of U.S. sanctions. Multiple sources told Reuters in late March that Chinese banks, as well as banks in Turkey and the United Arab Emirates, have become more cautious about U.S. secondary sanctions. They have begun to ask their customers to provide written assurances that the beneficiaries of the transaction or payment aren't involved with individuals or entities on the U.S. Specially Designated Nationals (SDN) blacklist. This has led to Russian oil companies facing delays and even non-payments when collecting payments of its crude oil and fuel. The Kremlin confirmed at the time that there were payment issues. The U.S. media has dropped hints of financial sanctions, putting a lot of pressure on Beijing. So far, the CCP is not ready to decouple the renminbi from the US dollar. Chinese currency, renminbi, is only most used for settlement of transactions between China and Southeast Asia, and with Russia. In other words, Blinken holds more diplomatic leverage on this visit to China and may be able to make progress on some of the issues. The US won't easily kick all Chinese banks out of the SWIFT system, as it would hurt the US too. But the damage to China would be much heavier. The Chinese media has also reported on related topics. What is the reaction of Chinese netizens? They are more realistic than the Beijing government. Among comments below the article by the Associated Press, one of the most echoed comments was, "Keeping company with hooligans makes it easy to be attacked by a swarm of other Western countries." There are also some interesting discussions. One netizen wrote, "Good, China takes this opportunity to build its own banking system." It received more than 300 likes, while one netizen responded with, "Build with what?" receiving more than 600 likes. There are also suggestions from netizens. China can do the opposite and cut off important ties with the US even more. We are a populous country. What do we fear? We can cut off capital, resources, and materials from the US and cooperate deeply with other countries. A response that received double kudos said, "With which country, for example, can we cooperate deeply? The Middle East, Russia, or Africa?" Lincoln's visit to China comes as the US Congress passes a $95 billion foreign aid bill that includes a new round of funding for Taiwan. The bill comes as Taiwan's president-elect Lai Ching-te takes office in less than a month, and like his predecessor Tsai Ing-wen, rejects the CCP's idea of reunifying Taiwan. We have already given a full account of the circumstances surrounding U.S. Secretary Blinken's visit to China, which you can access. What I want to emphasize here is that strengthening military collusion between the U.S. and Taiwan will not bring security to Taiwan, nor can it save Taiwan from the doomed fate of independence, but will only push up tensions and the risk of conflict and confrontation in the Taiwan Strait, and will ultimately be like lifting a rock and stoning one's own foot. The foreign aid bill passed by the U.S. Congress also includes pressure on Chinese company ByteDance to sell its ownership of TikTok within a 9-month time frame, or the social media app will face a ban in the U.S. This shows that Washington is stepping up its efforts to contain Beijing.
The terms of the bill are straightforward. TikTok continues to operate as it is right now until such time as either there is divestment or the time that you referred to elapses. And so what we're focused on right now in implementing the bill is working through that divestment in a way that is consistent with the intent of the law and consistent with the national security concerns that brought the law into force in the first place.
If the U.S. president determines that the sale is progressing, the 9-month deadline could also be extended for another 90 days, giving ByteDance up to a year to complete the deal. If ByteDance doesn't divest TikTok within the deadline, the app will be banned from U.S. app stores. In other words, if ByteDance failed to divest TikTok, app stores operated by Apple, Alphabet's Google, and others could not legally offer TikTok or provide web hosting services to ByteDance-controlled applications or TikTok's website. The 4-year battle over TikTok is a significant front in a war between Washington and Beijing over the internet and technology. Apple said on April 19th that it had removed Meta Platforms, WhatsApp, and Threads from its App Store in China after being ordered by the Chinese government, citing national security concerns. Telegram and Signal, 2 other foreign messaging apps, were also removed from the store on Friday, according to app tracking firms Qimai and AppMagic. The removal of the 4 apps suggests growing intolerance on the part of China's central government towards at least some foreign online messaging services that fall outside of its control. It also signals less leeway for Apple in China. It wasn't immediately clear how WhatsApp or Threads might have caused security concerns for Chinese authorities. Now, China-based TikTok, controlled by the CCP, is determined to take up the fight using American law.
Everyone, it's Show here. As you may have heard, Congress passed a bill that the president signed into law that is designed to ban TikTok in the United States. That will take TikTok away from you and 170 million Americans who find community and connection on our platform. Make no mistake, this is a ban on TikTok and a ban on you and your voice. Politicians may say otherwise, but don't get confused. Many who sponsored the bill admit a TikTok ban is their ultimate goal. It's obviously a disappointing moment, but it does not mean to be a defining one. It's actually ironic because the freedom of expression on TikTok reflects the same American values that make the United States a beacon of freedom. TikTok gives everyday Americans a powerful way to be seen and heard, and that's why so many people have made TikTok part of their daily lives. Rest assured, we aren't going anywhere. We are confident and we will keep fighting for your rights in the courts. The facts and the Constitution are on our side.
Blinken's second visit to China is part of a broader U.S. effort to keep the lines of communication open, and other U.S. officials have met or spoken with Chinese officials recently. But as major Western companies continue to pull out of China, the economic decoupling between the U.S. and China continues. Many analysts believe that Apple and Tesla will be the last major U.S. companies to move production lines out of China. Outside the U.S., China is Apple's biggest single market. Revenue for the October-December quarter last year accounted for about 17% of its total revenue. Market data on April 23rd showed that Apple's smartphone shipments in China fell 19% in the first quarter of 2024, its worst performance since 2020. Apple's market share in China fell to 15.7% in the first quarter of this year from 19.7% in the same period in 2023. The downturn in China's performance, which comes amid heightened geopolitical tensions between the US and China, should cause Apple to accelerate its move out of China. According to research firm Counterpoint, Apple's share of the Chinese market for cell phones fell to third place, roughly equal with Huawei. China's homegrown phone brands are leading the growth. Prior to that, according to market tracker IDC, Apple's iPhone shipments fell nearly 10% year-on-year in the first quarter of 2024 amid an overall rebound in the global smartphone industry. It was mainly weighed down by the Chinese market. Last September, U.S. media cited people familiar with the matter as saying that the CCP had extended its ban on iPhone use to government-backed organizations and state-owned enterprises, and that some Chinese organizations had begun instructing their employees not to bring their iPhones to work. Last December, informed sources told overseas media that in the past month or two, numerous government departments and state-owned enterprises, including those in at least 8 provinces, instructed their employees to start using domestic brands of cell phones. In addition, rival Huawei launched a homegrown smartphone last year and has received open media publicity as well as implicit support from the Chinese government, which has led to a surge in sales in China.
咱们也知道，国产苹果就是苹果、三星、华为这3家目前是顶流嘛，被集团称为御三家。这3家的都有非常不同的它那种设计语言在里面，包括这回华为也是做出这样的感觉。就比如我说这台X6P， 不是 X7 Ultra， 不错，这款产品就是同样都是高端机嘛，就华为的质感，我觉得还是更胜一筹的，毕竟当然价格也要更高一些嘛。
Following the Mate 60 series launch last August, Huawei unveiled the Pura 70 series of high-end phones in April 2024. The Mate 60 is seen as Huawei's comeback in the high-end market, and it's equipped with Chinese-made chips. U.S. Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo has said that the driver chips used in Huawei's flagship phones aren't as advanced as U.S. chips. The Chinese government's support for Huawei, sluggish consumption in the Chinese market, and intensifying trade disputes between the US and China could cause Apple to accelerate the move of its industrial chain out of mainland China. The recent frequent visits of Apple CEO Cook to India and Southeast Asia are a signal. The CCP also knows that crowding out foreign brands will hurt China's economy, but there's no turning back, and in order to fight the US, Beijing couldn't care less. Apple CEO Cook visited Southeast Asian countries such as Vietnam and Indonesia separately in mid-April and also visited India. Cook's X account described the trip as one in which he met with local content creators and communities. Still, media reports say Cook repeatedly emphasized the importance of the Southeast Asian region as a marketplace and emerging manufacturing base. In meetings with Southeast Asian government leaders, Cook discussed further collaboration between Apple and the respective countries, ranging from additional investment in manufacturing to artificial intelligence talent development.
We talked about the president's desire to see manufacturing in the country, and it's something that we will look at. I think the investment ability in Indonesia is endless. I think that there's a lot of great places to invest, and we're investing. We believe in the country.
The Southeast Asian region isn't far from China, providing a foundation for the industry chain to move out of China. Even some of the supply chains that can't be moved out can be transported quickly, which is also advantageous for Apple in reducing its manufacturing costs. Cook promised to expand investment in Vietnam's production base and consider production in Indonesia. Apple has most of its key production sites for iPads, AirPods, and Apple Watches in Vietnam, while suppliers of MacBooks have also invested in Vietnam. Apple currently has no production facilities in Indonesia, but has established 4 developer academies. Cook says there is a lot to invest in Indonesia, and Apple is investing in Indonesia. The Indonesian government hopes that Apple will use phone parts made in Indonesia, and it wants Indonesia to have access to Apple's global supply chain. Apple has already opened 2 official Apple retail stores in India. A recent Bloomberg report said that about 1/7 of Apple's iPhones have been assembled in India, totaling 14 billion. Cook's visit underscores the company's growing focus on Southeast Asia, due in large part to its sluggish performance in China and rising geopolitical tensions between the US and China. Finally, let's talk briefly about Tesla's recent performance. Tesla's operations are clearly experiencing high competition from Chinese companies, and the company's stock price has fallen 40%. Following the recent price cuts of $2,000 for Model Y, S, and X series in the US, Tesla announced on April 21st that it would cut the price of its entire lineup of products in China by RMB 14,000 for each model. Its signature model, the Model 3, will be ready to officially challenge BYD and other Chinese automakers in a price war. Noah Smith, a former columnist for Bloomberg, pointed out that although Tesla's construction of a megafactory in Shanghai has helped Tesla get out of bankruptcy, China has gradually transferred Tesla's technology to local Chinese companies through technology transfer, subsidies, and quiet consent to environmental damage. BYD and cell phone maker Xiaomi are even competing fiercely against Tesla. All this has cast a dark shadow over Tesla's future.